Some places are abandoned for a reason. The docks at Greyhaven haven't seen life in decades. Fog coils over broken wood and rusted metal, hiding secrets that should never be found. Mara, Ethan, and Lucas came looking for adventure thrills, videos, a story to tell. But curiosity is a dangerous companion, and some whispers in the fog aren't meant to be heard. Tonight, the shadows watch, the fog waits, and whatever lurks in the darkness has been waiting for them. Mara tightened her grip on the flashlight, the weak beam slicing through the thick gray fog that clung to the docks. Every step on the rotten planks groaned, as if warning them to turn back. Ethan laughed nervously, trying to mask his fear. "Come on, it's just an old dock," he said. "What's the worst that could happen?" Lucas didn't answer. His eyes darted into the mist, catching shapes that seemed to move just beyond the edge of the light. A whisper floated on the wind, faint, almost playful. "Leave or stay forever." They froze. The words weren't in any language they recognized, yet somehow they understood. Mara's stomach twisted. "Did you guys hear that?" she whispered. Ethan chuckled, too loudly. "It's just the wind. Fog makes everything sound creepy." But the wind carried another whisper, this time closer, curling around their ankles like a living thing. The fog shifted unnaturally, revealing a row of abandoned warehouses, their windows dark and gaping like empty eye sockets. Lucas took a cautious step forward. "I think something wants us to come inside." A sudden slam echoed from one of the warehouses. A door, far too heavy to move in the foggy wind, had shut violently on its own. The trio exchanged panicked glances. Mara swallowed hard, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Then she saw an indistinct figure, tall, standing motionless at the edge of the mist. Its face was hidden, but its presence was undeniable. It wasn't just watching. It was waiting. And the fog whispered again, "Welcome to Greyhaven. You've already stayed too long." Mara's hands shook as she held the flashlight higher, trying to pierce the thick fog. Ethan and Lucas exchanged nervous glances. The silhouette had vanished, or maybe it had just melted into the mist, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. "Maybe we should just leave," Mara whispered, but something in the fog seemed to pulse, like it was breathing around them. Ethan scoffed, but even he couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. "We can't back out now. We're already here. Let's just check the first warehouse." Quick in and out, Lucas led the way, pushing open the massive rusted door. It creaked so loudly, it felt like the entire dock had awakened. Inside, the air was thick with rot, old sea salt, and something else, something metallic, coppery, wet. The flashlight beam caught the glint of old fishing nets tangled in broken crates, but then it caught movement. Shadows, too fluid to be human, crawled along the walls. Shapes writhed, almost as if the building itself were alive. A whisper curled around Mara's ear. "You shouldn't be here?" Her blood ran cold. She spun around, but Ethan and Lucas were too absorbed in exploring to notice. The walls of the warehouse seemed to stretch, elongating, the shadows twisting into grotesque figures that mimicked human shapes, but moved wrong, limbs bending at impossible angles, heads tilting too far. Lucas froze, pointing at the far end of the warehouse. A faint, flickering light glowed inside an old crate. Mara's curiosity battled her terror. Against every instinct, she stepped closer. Inside the crate was a journal, its cover cracked and water-stained. She opened it. The pages were filled with messy handwriting, scrawled warnings and frantic notes. They watch, they wait, and the fog takes what it wants. Once you step inside, you belong. Suddenly, a cold hand brushed her shoulder. Mara screamed. She spun around. Nothing was there, but the shadows had shifted. The warehouse seemed to pulse with life, the walls closing in, whispering threats and voices layered over one another. Screams, laughter, and murmurs she recognized as her own name. Ethan tried to calm her, But a sudden crash echoed from the upper balcony. Something heavy fell, knocking over crates. The trio froze, hearts hammering. From the darkness above, a low, guttural whisper rolled through the warehouse. "Leave, or join the fog." Mara's flashlight flickered, the journal slipped from her hands, and the whispers grew louder, more urgent, circling them like predators. The dock outside felt impossibly far now, and the fog was creeping in. The air inside the warehouse grew thick, heavy with a smell that clawed at their lungs, rotting wood, wet earth, and something metallic. Mara's flashlight flickered, and in that brief darkness, a shadow darted across the far corner. Ethan froze, his breath caught in his throat. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. Lucas stepped forward, trying to stay calm, but the floorboards groaned beneath his feet as though the building itself was warning them to leave. The fog swirled unnaturally, curling around them, whispering secrets they couldn't understand. A door at the far end of the room slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed like gunfire, making their hearts leap. Mara spun toward it, but before she could move, a faint outline appeared in the mist tall, distorted, with long fingers that dragged along the ground. Its eyes glowed faintly, red and hollow, piercing through the fog. "Run!" Lucas shouted, grabbing Mara's arm. They dashed across the room, but every path they took seemed to twist back on itself. Walls that weren't there moments ago appeared, blocking their escape. The shadow followed silently, gliding across the floor, never making a sound, but its presence pressed against their minds like ice. Ethan tripped over a pile of crates, and when he looked up, he saw the shadow was closer than physically possible. It tilted its head, as if studying him. The whispers grew louder, forming words just out of comprehension. "You can't leave. You belong." Mara grabbed his hand, dragging him forward, and they stumbled into a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly. The fog thickened until it was all they could see. Faint outlines of figures appeared in the mist-twisted, faceless shapes reaching toward them. Every step felt heavier, as if the floor itself was trying to hold them down. Finally, they reached a staircase leading upward. The steps creaked under their weight, groaning like the warehouse itself was alive. As they climbed, a single distant laugh echoed from below, childlike, yet impossibly distorted. Mara's stomach turned. It sounded like hundreds of children crying and laughing at the same time. When they reached the top, a large window looked out over the fog. But the city below wasn't normal, it was twisted. Streets bent at impossible angles, lights flickered in unnatural colors, and shadows moved against the laws of physics. In the distance, the same shadow loomed over the city, larger, more menacing, as if it had been waiting for them all along. They realized, with a sickening clarity, that the fog wasn't just around the warehouse, it was everywhere. And now, so was whatever had followed them. The whispers became a chorus. "You cannot hide. You belong. You cannot leave." Mara's flashlight died, plunging them into darkness. And in that darkness, the figures in the fog began to step forward. The darkness swallowed Mara and Ethan as their eyes strained to adjust. Every instinct screamed to run, but the staircase behind them had vanished. The steps were gone, replaced by nothing but endless black. The fog thickened around them, moving like living smoke, curling into shapes that felt almost human. And a sound, scratching, low and deliberate, echoing from every corner at once. It wasn't on the floor, it came from the walls, the ceiling, even the air itself. The whispers became clearer, forming words that chilled them to the bone. "You shouldn't have come. You cannot leave. Stay forever." Mara reached for Ethan's hand, but the fog seemed to push back, cold and viscous, holding her in place. When she looked down, the floor beneath her feet was no longer solid wood. It was a swirling abyss, dark as ink, and she could hear faint screams echoing from its depths. Ethan tried to shine his flashlight again, but it flickered violently before shattering, plunging them into complete darkness. Then came movement in the fog figures emerging, distorted, faceless, their limbs bending at impossible angles. They didn't walk, they glided, floating slightly above the ground, their presence suffocating. A sound like hundreds of children laughing at once erupted from the mist, overlapping with low, guttural growls. One of the figures drifted closer, its hollow eyes locking on Ethan. He felt a pull in his chest, as if invisible strings were tugging at his very soul. Mara screamed as a hand, pale and elongated, reached through the fog, brushing against her arm. She felt the cold seep into her bones, and for a terrifying second, it felt like it wanted to merge with her, take her completely. Suddenly, the fog parted just enough to reveal a door at the end of the corridor, old and decrepit, but somehow untouched by the decay around it. A faint light pulsed from within, warm and inviting, yet sinister. "You have a choice," a voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Step through, or become one of us." Ethan and Mara exchanged a glance. Neither wanted to enter, but neither could retreat. The fog pressed closer, the figures advancing. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the floor behind them was gone. The only path was forward. With a trembling hand, Mara pushed the door open. A burst of light washed over them, blinding and hot, and for a moment they felt weightless, like falling through air instead of walking through space. When their vision cleared, they were in a room unlike any other in the warehouse. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting not their images, but warped versions of themselves, twisted, screaming, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent agony. The whispers now came from the mirrors, echoing their deepest fears, their darkest secrets. And in the center of the room, a figure waited, taller than any human, faceless, limbs stretching unnaturally. Its head tilted slowly, acknowledging them. Its presence was suffocating an undeniable promise that it had been waiting, patiently, for their arrival. The floor trembled. The mirrors began to ripple, as though alive, and the chorus of whispers grew louder. "You belong. You cannot leave. You belong." Mara and Ethan realized the truth in horror. Whatever awaited them here would not let them go. Not alive. Not ever. Mara's breath caught in her throat. The mirrors weren't just reflections. They were windows, showing endless versions of herself and Ethan, all screaming, clawing, twisting in agony. She stumbled back, her hands scraping the cold wall, but the mirrors stretched farther than the room could possibly allow, as if the space itself had no limits. Ethan tried to reach her, but the floor beneath him rippled like liquid glass. Each step made him feel heavier, as if gravity itself was bending against him. The faceless figure in the center of the room tilted its head again, and the air thickened, pressing against their chests like invisible hands. Then the whispers changed. They became laughter, high-pitched and insane. One of the mirrors cracked, and from the fracture emerged a hand pale, thin, impossibly long. It grabbed Ethan by the ankle and yanked. He fell, flailing, and Mara screamed as she tried to pull him free. The hand clung like iron, and the mirror seemed to pulse, drawing him in. Mara screamed at the figure, pleading, bargaining, promising anything, but it didn't move. Its faceless head tilted slightly, acknowledging her fear but showing no mercy. Around them, the other mirrors began to ripple. Figures stepped out from the glass, twisted echoes of previous victims, their mouths moving in silent screams, eyes hollow, reaching with desperate, clawing hands. Panic surged. Mara grabbed a shard of broken mirror from the floor and swung it blindly at one of the figures. The shard passed through it, but the figure recoiled as if wounded, fading back into the mirror. Each strike she made created a small explosion of mist, but it was never enough. More figures emerged, more hands reached, more faces screamed. Suddenly, the central figure moved, or rather, the space around it warped, folding like fabric. The mirrors around it rippled violently, and the reflection of Mara in one mirror stepped forward on its own, mimicking her movements, but smiling a twisted, sinister grin that chilled her to the bone. "You cannot fight it," the voice whispered again, omnipresent. "You are already part of the room. Every fear, every regret. It belongs to us now." Mara's heart hammered. She realized the mirrors weren't just reflecting, they were feeding. Every fear, every memory, every ounce of terror was being absorbed, stored, twisted into the house's endless collection. And now it hungered for them, and only one path remained: forward, through the pulsing light of the cracked central mirror. Ethan's voice shook. "We have to go. Together. Now." With trembling hands, they grasped each other and stepped through the fractured glass. A scream tore from their throats as the mirrors stretched around them, the echoes of countless trapped souls merging into a deafening roar. Light and shadow collided, and the room vanished, replaced by a sensation of free fall falling into something alive, ancient, and waiting. When they landed, the air was still, but the silence was heavy, oppressive. They were in another room larger, darker, lined with doors. Each door whispered their names, promising escape, promising death, promising both. Somewhere deep within, Mara felt the central figure watching, patient, eternal, ready to claim what it had waited for. The worst part, one of the doors had their names etched into it, fresh, and then a whisper from the darkness: "Choose or join the rest." Mara's pulse raced. Each door seemed alive, breathing, shifting slightly as if testing her. Ethan's hand gripped hers tightly, and she could feel his fear, mirroring her own. They took a hesitant step toward the nearest door, its wood dark and slick, like it had been polished with something organic. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, hundreds of voices pleading, laughing, crying, begging, threatening. "Which one?" Mara whispered, voice trembling. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know. None of them feel right." A cold wind swept through the hall, extinguishing the faint light from the ceiling sconces. Shadows stretched along the walls, merging into shapes that seemed human, but twisted, impossible. One shadow detached itself from the corner, moving independently, sliding silently toward them. Mara froze as it spoke, not in words, but in a chorus of screams and distorted echoes of Ethan's voice. The shadow circled them, testing, prodding, feeding off their fear. Then it merged into the nearest door, making the wood pulse, ripple, and finally split open with a screech that pierced their ears. Inside, the room was alive with movement. Countless eyes blinked from the walls, following every step, every breath. The floor rippled as if it were liquid, reflecting their terrified faces in broken shards. Something whispered directly into Mara's mind: "All choices are illusions. Only fear decides." Ethan grabbed a door handle at random. The wood burned under his touch. He yanked it open, and a blinding light surged out, forcing them both to shield their eyes. When they opened them again, they were no longer in the hall. They stood in a long, narrow corridor lined with hundreds of paintings, each one depicting the same mansion, but each had a shadowy figure lurking in a different corner. Their eyes seemed to follow Mara and Ethan. Each frame whispered a name, the name of someone lost in the house, their screams trapped inside the paint. Suddenly, one painting rippled. A hand reached out, grabbing Ethan's arm. He screamed, pulling back, but the hand clung, cold and unyielding. Mara lunged, grabbing the hand and tearing it away. The painting recoiled, the shadow inside screeching as if hurt. Mara's mind spun. "It's like the house. It's alive." The whispers became a roar, louder than before. The corridor walls seemed to close in, narrowing the path. Another painting shimmered, revealing a new figure, someone they recognized. The missing janitor from the mansion's legend, eyes hollow, pointing toward a distant door at the corridor's end. "Follow him," the whispering voices urged, "or stay forever." Ethan hesitated. How do we know we can trust it? Mara's gaze locked on the figure. Its mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, a pulse of fear radiated from the painting, tugging at their hearts. It was the only way forward. Reluctantly, they ran toward the distant door. Behind them, the corridor shivered, the walls contracting, the painting's eyes blazing with malice. Each step made the floor quiver, as if the house was counting, timing, waiting for them to falter. When they reached the door, Mara hesitated. A final whisper echoed directly in her mind. Once you pass, there is no turning back. With trembling hands, they turned the handle and pushed. The door groaned as it opened, revealing darkness thick, suffocating, yet somehow beckoning them forward. And then, without warning, the shadows lunged. Mara and Ethan stumbled into the darkness, the door slamming shut behind them with a thunderous bang. The sound reverberated through the endless void, leaving only silence. And then whispers. Soft at first, then swelling into a chorus of voices angry, pleading, mocking. Their eyes strained against the blackness. Shapes moved around them, but there was no floor beneath their feet, no walls, only the sensation of falling, suspended in the void. A faint, cold light flickered ahead, and they took cautious steps toward it. The light revealed a massive room, circular, walls lined with mirrors. But these weren't ordinary reflections. Each mirror showed a distorted version of themselves, twisted by fear. Mara's eyes were hollow, her hands clawed. Ethan's mouth stretched into a silent scream. Suddenly, the mirrors shivered. Faces began to press against the glass, trying to escape. Whispers grew frantic. Join us. Stay forever. Become one of us. Ethan grabbed Mara's arm. We need to break them, he said, panic rising. Mara scanned the mirrors, noticing a faint inscription along the edges. Fear fuels the house. Break the fear, break the walls. She realized what they had to do. The shadows began to pour from the mirrors like black smoke, moving toward them, tendrils reaching out. Mara's heart pounded. She took a deep breath, focusing, remembering every nightmare the house had thrown at them. Instead of running, she faced it. We are not yours. She screamed. The words echoed through the room, vibrating against the mirrors. The shadows recoiled, shrieking. Ethan followed, shouting, Leave yous alone. The mirrors cracked, one by one, splintering under the force of their defiance. Each crack weakened the shadows, causing them to writhe, scream, and dissolve into mist. The light grew brighter, pushing the darkness back. But then a low, guttural growl came from the center of the room. The shadows swirled together, forming a towering figure tall, faceless, eyes like black voids, limbs stretching impossibly. The house itself seemed to manifest in this creature, the culmination of every soul it had consumed. Mara and Ethan exchanged a glance. They were terrified, but they had no choice. The creature lunged. They dodged, stumbled, and ran, every step a battle against the house's pull. At the far side of the room, a massive mirror glowed differently, radiating warmth and light. Mara knew it was the exit, the only chance. The shadow screeched, shaking the floor as it advanced. Ethan grabbed Mara's hand, and together they sprinted, leaping toward the glowing mirror. The shadows tried to drag them back, tendrils clawing at their feet, but their fear had turned into defiance. They felt the pull weaken, and with a final desperate leap, they smashed through the mirror. Light engulfed them. The screams and whispers were cut off abruptly, replaced by silence. Mara opened her eyes. They were outside the mansion, the night calm and still. The fog had lifted, leaving only the abandoned house in the distance, silent and foreboding. They had escaped for now, but Mara couldn't shake the feeling that the house had marked them, and the ledger was far from complete. And somewhere deep in the shadows, a whisper lingered. We will see you again. Mara couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the mirrors cracking, the shadows writhing, and the faceless figure towering over them. Even in the safety of her bedroom, she felt eyes on her, as if the house itself had followed them. Ethan tried to reassure her. "We made it out. That's all that matters," he said, but his voice wavered. Mara knew he felt it too, the lingering pull of the mansion, the sensation that something unfinished was watching them. At midnight, her phone buzzed. A message appeared on the screen, though it wasn't from any number she recognized. "The ledger remembers. You escaped, but not for long." Her blood ran cold. The air around her seemed to thicken, shadows creeping along the corners of the room. She could hear faint whispers, almost like a heartbeat. Ethan's apartment wasn't safe either. He opened his laptop, only to find an image and aerial view of the mansion, glowing faintly in the darkness, but now a figure stood at the highest window. It was impossible. They had left. Mara realized the house didn't just exist in the physical world anymore. It had found a way to reach them, feeding on fear even from afar. Panic surged. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of leaves outside made her jump. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a voice whispered her name, soft, familiar, yet impossibly menacing. The shadows in her room lengthened unnaturally, crawling along the walls toward her. Ethan grabbed her hand. "We need to fight it. Together." They remembered the inscription. "Fear fuels the house. Break the fear, break the walls." But how could they fight something that existed in their minds, their fears, their memories? The room grew colder. The whispering intensified, filling their minds with visions of the house, the ledger, and every soul trapped within. Faces appeared in the darkness, eyes hollow, mouths screaming silently. Mara clenched her fists. She forced herself to focus, to remember the warmth of sunlight, the safety of the world outside the mansion. She imagined light filling the room, pushing back the darkness. Ethan did the same. The shadows recoiled, hissing and screeching. The whispers faltered, confused by their resistance. The room began to tremble, the walls bending inward, trying to pull them into some unseen abyss. Then, Mara's vision sharpened. She could see the edges of the shadowy tendrils fraying, dissolving into mist. Ethan shouted, "Keep going. Don't let it scare you." They focused together, fear transforming into defiance. The shadows shrieked, twisting, recoiling, until finally, silence. The room fell still. The oppressive weight lifted. But Mara knew it wasn't over. The ledger hadn't forgotten them, and the house would always remember. Somewhere, deep in the darkness, the whispers waited, and now they were awake. The following night, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that the house had followed them again. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside seemed amplified. Ethan tried to convince her it was their imagination, but deep down, he felt it too, the lingering presence, patient and watching. Suddenly, their apartment door rattled. No wind, no one outside, just rattling. They froze. Then came a whisper, louder than before. "You cannot hide. The ledger demands you." The shadows in the corners of the room thickened, moving independently of the light. Mara grabbed Ethan's hand, heart hammering. They had tried to fight the fear, but the house wasn't just a building anymore. It was a predator, relentless and clever. On the coffee table lay a small, black-bound notebook. Neither of them remembered putting it there. Mara opened it. The pages were blank, except for one line written in fresh, jagged ink. "Return, or be claimed." The room seemed to shrink. The walls groaned. From every mirror, every reflective surface, the faceless figure appeared, closer, reaching. Ethan screamed as the shadows slithered along the walls, their fingers grazing his skin, cold as ice. Mara's mind raced. She remembered the mantra from the mansion. Fear fuels the house. Break the fear, break the walls. But now, fear wasn't just inside the house, it was inside them. Every heartbeat, Every thought of dread was feeding it. She looked into Ethan's eyes. "We have to face it, together." They stood, facing the room, and forced themselves to remember the warmth of sunlight, the feeling of open air, the sound of real voices outside. Their focus sharpened. They refused to give in. The shadows roared, twisting, stretching, trying to swallow them whole. The faceless figure stepped closer, towering, unyielding, its hollow eyes locking onto them. Mara's voice rang out. "You don't control us." Ethan joined, shouting, "We are not yours." The shadows faltered. The figure shrieked, a sound that rattled their bones. The room shivered violently as light began to pierce the darkness. The tendrils of shadow shrank back, writhing like wounded snakes. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. The notebooks snapped shut. The mirrors reflected only their own faces. The apartment felt normal again, almost. But Mara's chest tightened with dread. She knew the house hadn't truly left. It was waiting, planning, biding its time. A final whisper, soft, almost tender, lingered in the air. "This is not the end." The ledger never forgets. Mara and Ethan sat frozen as the apartment finally went silent. The shadows had vanished. The whispers dissolved into nothing, but the air still felt wrong, stretched thin like skin over bone. Neither of them spoke. They were afraid that if they did, something might answer back. The black notebook lay on the floor between them, closed, lifeless. Ethan nudged it cautiously with his foot. Nothing happened. No whispers, no movement. "Is it over?" he asked. Mara didn't answer immediately. Her chest felt tight, her instincts screaming that the house was never truly finished. Evil like that didn't end it, waited. Suddenly, the notebook began to burn. Not with flames, but with a cold white glow. Symbols flared briefly across its cover before the book collapsed inward, folding into itself like paper pulled into a void, then vanished completely. The pressure lifted. For the first time since Greyhaven, the air felt normal, real. They survived. 1 month later, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Mara stopped waking up screaming. Ethan started sleeping with the lights off again. The fog around Greyhaven docks was gone, officially declared a weather anomaly by local news. The abandoned mansion? Condemned, fenced off, forgotten, or so it seemed. One evening, Mara stood at a bookstore, flipping through old journals in the clearance section. One leather-bound book caught her eye black, cracked, familiar. Her heart dropped. She opened it. Blank pages. No symbols. No whispers. Relieved, she placed it back and walked away. She didn't notice the final page writing itself as she left. Survivors are not free. They are marked. Far away, beyond maps and memory, a house stood where no house should exist. Its walls breathed. Its halls stretched endlessly. A new name slowly carved itself into the wood. The house waited, patient, hungry, eternal, because the ledger is never full. If you felt the fear, subscribe now, because the next story is even darker.